Tonight is for the mind that will not stop. The one still turning at this hour, still reviewing, still whispering what if, what if, what if, as though the answer might finally arrive at 2 in the morning if it only asks one more time. There is an old teaching, 25 centuries old, that says worry is not a sickness to cure or a fire to put out. It is a weather, and like all weather, it passes. Not because you forced it to, but because that is what weather does. Tonight, we will sit with that weather together. You do not need to understand it. You do not need to stop it. Just listen and let the stories do the rest. Before we begin, I would love to know, where in the world are you listening from tonight? And what time is it where you are? Feel free to share in the comments. And if these quiet stories help you find rest, a like or a subscribe means the world to this small channel. It helps others who cannot sleep find their way here too. Now, let us settle in together. I remember a night when sleep would not come. Not because of some great crisis, but because of arithmetic. Whether there would be enough for the bus fare in the morning. Whether lunch was something the budget could afford that week. The mind did not race toward catastrophe. It circled the smallest things. The price of rice. The cost of a single commute. And each circle tightened like a knot that no amount of thinking could undo. I have learned since then that worry at its most honest is rarely about the big things. It is about the smallest ones, the ones too ordinary to name out loud. And if that is where your mind is tonight, circling something small, something you are almost embarrassed to call a worry, then you are in exactly the right place. These are not lessons to memorize or rules to follow. They are simply stories, invitations to rest. There is nothing you need to understand tonight. Nothing you need to remember by morning. If your mind wanders, let it wander. If you drift in and out of listening, that is not a failure. That is exactly how this is meant to be heard. You do not need to pay attention. You only need to be here. Tonight, we will explore teachings from an ancient tradition. Wisdom that has helped restless minds find rest for over 2,500 years. Not through technique, not through discipline, but through the simplest of human acts, storytelling. Long before there were sleep apps and white noise machines and breathing exercises with names and steps, there were people lying awake in the dark and other people sitting beside them, telling stories until the worrying stopped. That is all this is. That is all it has ever been. The tradition we draw from tonight is Buddhism, but not the kind you might imagine. Not incense and chanting and crossed legs on hard floors. The Buddhism of these stories is quieter than that. It is the Buddhism of a woman sitting by a river, watching leaves float past, and realizing she does not need to catch any of them. It is the Buddhism of an old man who has stopped arguing with his own mind. It is the Buddhism that lives not in temples, but in kitchens, not in scriptures, but in the small hours of the night, when the house is finally still and the mind is finally honest. You do not need to know anything about Buddhism to receive what is offered here. You do not need to believe anything. You do not even need to agree. These are simply stories told in the dark for anyone who could use a quieter night. So settle in now. Let your body find whatever position feels most comfortable. Let your shoulders drop, just a little, just enough. Take a slow, deep breath Not a dramatic one, just a breath that says, I am here. I am not going anywhere for a while, and let us begin our journey together. Thank you for joining us here at Moonlit Dharma. When you are ready, let us begin with something simple. A truth that a woman once discovered not through wisdom or study, but through the sound of waves against a shore she had come to know like a second heartbeat. In a village where the coast bent inward like a cupped hand, there lived a woman who had spent 34 years teaching children to read. She had retired the previous autumn, not because she wanted to, but because her hands had begun to shake in a way that made writing on the board difficult, and she did not want the children to see her struggle. She moved to a small cottage near the water, the kind of place people imagine when they think of peace. Stone walls, a low roof, a window that looked out over the Atlantic. But peace did not come with the cottage. It did not arrive with the view of the water, or the sound of the gulls, or the long mornings, with nothing required of her. If anything, the quiet made it worse. A busy mind in a busy life can hide in the busyness, but a busy mind in a still house has nowhere to go but in circles. Every night she lay in the narrow bed with its rough wool blanket and listened to the sea. The mattress was thin, and she could feel the wooden frame beneath it. Solid, unyielding, the way old furniture is. She would lie on her back first, then her side, then her back again. And each position felt like the wrong answer to a question she had not been asked. And every night, instead of sleeping, her mind returned to the classroom. It returned to a boy named David, who had stopped coming to school in the 4th grade, and she had not knocked on his door to ask why. It returned to a girl who had cried in the hallway, and she had said the wrong thing. She had said, "It will be fine," when what the girl needed was someone to say, "I see that this is not fine." It returned to a parent meeting where she had lost her temper, and to a quiet student whose name she could no longer remember, and that forgetting felt like a second failure. The cottage smelled of dried lavender and salt air. The lamplight cast a warm amber glow on the ceiling. The pillow was cold against her cheek. And still the mind reviewed, night after night, playing the same scenes with small variations, as though this time, if she could just find the right words, the past might agree to change. One evening she walked to the shore at low tide and found her neighbor, an old fisherman who had lived on the coast his entire life, sitting on an overturned boat, looking at the water. She sat beside him without being invited, which was unusual for her. They were quiet for a while. "Do you ever lie awake at night?" she asked. He looked at her, the way fishermen look at the sea, not with urgency, but with the patience of someone who has learned that the water does what the water does. "Every night," he said. "What keeps you up?" "The same thing that keeps you up, I imagine." The mind goes back over things. A net I should have mended, a storm I should have waited out, my brother's funeral, where I said too little. She was surprised. He seemed like a man who slept easily. "How do you live with it?" she asked. He did not answer right away. He pulled a cigarette from his coat pocket, looked at it, and put it back without lighting it. A habit she would come to recognize as his version of thinking. "I don't know that I live with it," he said. "I think I just stopped fighting it." He paused. "There's a difference." He pointed at the waves. "You see that? The sea replays too. Every wave returns to the shore. But have you noticed, Each time it returns, it is a little different. It brings something new, or takes something away. The wave looks the same, but it never is. She watched the water for a long time. Your mind is doing what the sea does, he said. It is not broken. It is just doing what minds do. The trouble starts when we stand at the edge and shout at the waves to stop. She considered this. The wind picked up slightly, carrying the smell of kelp and salt from the rocks below. But the waves are beautiful, she said. My thoughts are not. He smiled, not a happy smile, but the kind that comes from recognizing something familiar. No, he said. They're not always beautiful, but they are yours. And they are trying to tell you something. The problem isn't the message, it's that you keep reading it over and over, expecting different words. There is a verse in the Dhammapada, one of the oldest collections of the Buddha's words, that says, "Whatever an enemy might do to an enemy, or a foe to a foe, the ill-directed mind can do to you far worse." The fisherman had never read the Dhammapada. He did not know this verse, but he knew its truth the way anyone who has spent 60 years watching the sea knows things, not through study, but through showing up again and again to the same shore. She walked back to the cottage that night and lay in the bed. The wool blanket was rough against her fingers. The lavender was faint on the nightstand. The waves came and went beneath the window. For the first time in months, she did not try to stop the reviewing. She let the mind return to David, to the girl in the hallway, to the parent meeting. But she listened to the memories the way she had listened to the waves, without shouting at them to stop. And somewhere between the third return and the fourth, her eyes closed. Not because the worry had gone, but because she had stopped standing at the edge, shouting. Tonight, if you are lying here with a mind that insists on reviewing the day, replaying, in conversations rewriting what you said, rehearsing what you wish you had said, you are not broken, you are not doing something wrong. The Buddha himself described the restless, agitated mind as hard to protect, hard to control. And then, very gently, compared the sage not to someone who conquered the mind, but to a fletcher. A fletcher does not fight the arrow. A fletcher does not shout at the wood to be straight. A fletcher simply sits with it patiently and shapes it over time. There is no urgency in that image. There is no battle. There is only patience and the quiet assumption that the wood will cooperate, eventually, in its own time. You do not need to be a fletcher tonight. You do not need to straighten anything. You only need to know that the mind you are lying with, the one that will not stop, is not your enemy. It is just weather, and you have survived every weather you have ever known. There is a small image I would like to leave with you before we continue. Imagine a pond at night, not a large pond, the kind you might find at the edge of a meadow, half hidden by tall grass, the kind that children discover in summer and forget by autumn. The surface is restless, rippled by wind, disturbed by insects landing and lifting, touched by the smallest disturbances. A leaf falls, a frog slips in from the bank, a breeze crosses the water like a hand brushing fabric. If you looked only at the surface, you would say, this pond is agitated, unsettled, troubled. But beneath the surface, just a few inches down, the water is calm. It does not know about the wind. It does not register the leaf or the frog or the breeze. And at the very bottom, in the mud and the roots and the slow dark, Fish are sleeping. They have been sleeping since the sun went down. They will sleep until it rises. The surface does not concern them. They live in the depth. The Buddha once compared the worried mind to a fish out of water, thrown on dry ground, thrashing, gasping, desperate to find its way back. It is a vivid image, and there is truth in it. But perhaps tonight, the truer image is this. You are not the fish on the ground. You are the fish at the bottom of the pond. The worry is the surface. You are the depth, and the depth is always, always still. The wind cannot reach it. The leaf cannot disturb it. It simply is, dark, quiet, and yours. Now let us go somewhere colder, somewhere higher, somewhere where the nights are longer and the stars are closer to the ground. In a monastery built into the side of a mountain, the kind of place where the stone walls were older than anyone who lived within them. There was a man whose job was to watch the grounds at night. He was not a monk. He had never taken robes or shaved his head or sat in meditation for more than 5 restless minutes. He was simply the night watchman, hired because he could not sleep anyway, and the monastery needed someone awake between midnight and dawn. His name does not matter. What matters is that he envied the monks. He watched them walk to meditation at 4 in the morning with a steadiness that seemed impossible to him. Their faces were calm, their steps were even. They carried nothing visible, no phones, no bags, no urgency, and he imagined that inside their minds there was a similar emptiness, a clean swept room with no furniture and no noise. His own mind, by contrast, was a cluttered workshop. Tools left out on every surface, drawers half open, projects started and abandoned. And somewhere underneath it all, the constant low hum of a machine he could not find the switch to turn off. His mother was 83 and lived alone in a city 4 hours south. And every night he calculated how many more winters she might manage the stairs. He owed money to a man he had once called a friend, and the debt had outlived the friendship. His brother had not spoken to him in 6 years over something so small that neither of them could remember what it was, only that it had happened, and that the silence afterward had grown too large to cross. The monastery courtyard was cold underfoot, bare stone that held the chill of the mountain even in summer. His breath was visible in the moonlight. The smell of pine resin drifted from the forest below. A distant bell rang at intervals he had memorized but never understood. One night he found he was not alone. An old monk, perhaps the oldest in the monastery, was sitting on the stone bench near the well, wrapped in a blanket, looking at nothing in particular. "Cannot sleep?" the watchman asked. The old monk shook his head, not sadly, just honestly. The watchman sat beside him. They were quiet for a long time. The stars moved overhead the way stars do, slowly enough that you cannot see it happening, but fast enough that if you look away and look back, everything has shifted. This became a pattern. 2 or 3 nights a week, the old monk would appear, and they would sit together in silence. The watchman never asked why the monk could not sleep. The monk never asked about the watchman's worries. They simply sat in the cold, 2 men awake, in a world that was trying to rest. After many weeks, the watchman finally asked the question that had been circling his mind since the first night. "How do you find peace?" The old monk turned to him. His eyes were kind, but not soft. The eyes of someone who had looked at difficult things for a long time without flinching. "I have not found it," the monk said. The watchman waited. "I have simply stopped looking for it in the wrong places." "Where were you looking?" "In the absence of worry. I spent 40 years trying to empty my mind, as though peace were a room, and worry were the furniture I needed to remove. But the room was never empty, and the carrying was exhausting." He paused. "Peace is not an empty room. It is the willingness to sit in a cluttered one without needing to rearrange." The watchman looked at the courtyard, the stone, the moonlight on the well. "You still worry," he said. It was not a question. "Every night," the monk said, "about my students, about whether I have taught well, about death, my own, and the deaths of people I love. The worries have not left, but I have stopped treating them as intruders." They sat together until the 4 o'clock bell rang, and the monks began to file into the meditation hall. The old monk stood slowly, wrapped his blanket tighter, and walked toward the hall. At the doorway he turned. "You think we are calm," he said. "We are not calm. We have just learned to sit with the noise, and after a while, a long while, the noise stops feeling like an emergency." He paused at the threshold, his sandals quiet on the stone. "The difference between you and me," he said, "is not that I have fewer worries. It is that I have stopped believing they need to be resolved before I can rest." The watchman watched him go. The courtyard was empty again. The stars had shifted. The pine resin drifted up from the valley, and for the first time, the watchman did not envy the monks. Not because he had found peace, but because he had learned that they had not found it either, and that, somehow, was the most peaceful thing anyone had ever told him. He leaned back against the cold stone wall. The stars were beginning to fade. Somewhere in the valley, a rooster crowed too early, confused by the moonlight, perhaps, or simply impatient. The watchman smiled. Even the rooster could not wait for morning. Even the rooster had a restless mind. The Buddha described worry as one of the 5 hindrances, the 5 clouds that cover the mind and make it difficult to see clearly. He called it kukuka, a Pali word that is usually translated as worry or remorse, but whose meaning runs deeper than either English word suggests. Kukuka carries within it the sense of something done wrongly in the mind, not a specific act of wrongdoing, but a feeling that something, somewhere, is not right, and the mind cannot stop searching for what it is. It is the itch you cannot locate, the door you are not sure you locked, the conversation you are almost certain went badly, but cannot quite prove. It is the feeling that wakes you at 3 in the morning and says, "Check again." Not because there is new information, but because the old information has not yet been accepted. The Buddha paired kukuka with uddaka, restlessness. Together they form a single hindrance, because worry and restlessness are not separate things. They are 2 names for the same weather. The mind that worries cannot sit still, and the mind that cannot sit still begins to worry. They feed each other the way wind feeds fire. The Buddha compared this hindrance to water in a pot stirred by wind. The surface so agitated that if you leaned over to see your reflection, you would see only distortion. Not because the water is broken, not because you are broken, but because the surface has not been given the chance to settle. And the most radical thing the Buddha suggested was this: you do not need to stop the wind. You only need to wait. The water knows how to become still. It has been doing so since before you were born. Perhaps right now, without deciding to, your breath has already begun to slow. Perhaps your shoulders have dropped half an inch since we started. Perhaps the grip of whatever you were holding when you pressed play has loosened. Just slightly, just enough to notice. You did not decide to do this. Your body did it on its own. Because the body has been listening to these stories too, and it has already begun its own quiet journey toward rest. You are not the stirred water. You are the water itself, and the water, given time, always settles. Let us rest here for a moment. Take a slow breath, not a deep one, not a dramatic one. Just a breath that acknowledges you are still here. Feel the weight of your body against whatever is holding you right now. The bed, the pillow, the blanket, the dark. Notice what has begun to soften since we started this journey. Perhaps it is something in the shoulders. Perhaps it is something behind the eyes. Perhaps it is something you cannot name but can feel. A loosening, a quieting, a letting be that was not there 20 minutes ago. There is no rush. There is nowhere to be. The night is long, and we have many more stories to share. When you are ready, we will continue together. There is another thread in tonight's journey. One that begins not with a story, but with a question the mind asks itself when no one else is listening. It is a question you may have asked tonight, or last night, or every night this week. The question is simple, and it is this. Why does the mind replay? Why does it return, again and again, to the same conversation, the same mistake, the same worry, as though repetition might finally change the outcome? The answer, as it turns out, is older than you might expect. The mind replays because it believes, somewhere beneath the surface, that if it returns to the scene one more time, with fresher eyes, with a sharper memory, with just a little more attention, it will finally find what it missed. It is not trying to hurt you. It is trying to help. But its help is the kind that keeps you awake at 3 in the morning. And that is a help you did not ask for. Let us take a slow breath here. Just one. And let us visit a woman who knows this kind of help better than most. In a house at the end of a quiet suburban street, the kind of street where the mailboxes all look the same and the lawns are mowed on the same day, there was a bedroom that had not changed in 2 years. The curtains were the ones she and her husband had chosen together in a department store, disagreeing gently about the color until they found a shade they both disliked equally, which felt like compromise. The reading glasses on the nightstand were still his, wire-rimmed, slightly bent at the temple, where he had a habit of pushing them up with one finger. She had not moved them. She told herself this was because she had not gotten around to it, but that was not the reason, and she knew it. The bed was a queen. She slept on the left side. The right side was still made. The pillow plumped, the sheet folded back, the way he had always left it, as though he might return from the bathroom at any moment and slide in beside her with the particular sigh he made every night, the one that said the day is done. I am here. I am tired. This is enough. Spring had come again. The jasmine outside the window was blooming, and its sweetness drifted through the screen and mixed with the cooler air of the bedroom. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked with a patience she envied. It did not speed up at night, did not slow down when anxious, did not lose its rhythm when the house was empty. It simply ticked, and between the ticks, there was a silence that was not empty, but full of all the sounds that used to be there and were not there anymore. Every night, her mind returned to their last conversation. It was not a dramatic conversation. There were no final words, no deathbed wisdom. No, "I love you" timed perfectly for the ending of a movie. They had been in the kitchen. It was a Tuesday. He had opened the refrigerator and said, "We're out of milk." She had said, "I'll get some tomorrow." He had said, "Get the 2%. The whole milk gives me heartburn." And she had said, "You always say that, and then you drink the whole milk anyway." And he had smiled, not a big smile, just the small one that meant she was right, and he did not mind being caught. That was it. That was the last conversation. Milk and bread and a smile about heartburn. And every night, her mind returned to it. Not because it was meaningful, but because it was not. Her mind searched for something hidden in those ordinary words. A clue she had missed, a goodbye disguised as a grocery list, a final message encoded in the mention of 2% milk. The mind insisted there must be more. There must be a last thing he wanted to say. There must be a sentence underneath the sentence, a meaning beneath the mundane. But there was not. Their last conversation was about milk, and that she could not accept, because if the last conversation was just a conversation, if there was no hidden meaning, no secret farewell, then it meant that life does not arrange itself into tidy endings. It means that the most important people in your life can leave between one ordinary sentence and the next. And the world does not even pause to mark the transition. Her granddaughter visited on a Sunday. She was 7. With the particular directness of children who have not yet learned that some questions are supposed to be difficult. "What did Grandpa's voice sound like?" she asked, sitting on the bedroom floor with a coloring book. The woman opened her mouth and then closed it. She had been replaying his words every night for 2 years. But she had been replaying the words, not the voice. The content, not the sound. She realized, with a small shock, that the voice was fading. The words were sharp, but the music of them was blurring at the edges. The way a photograph loses detail the more you handle it. "It was low," she said slowly, "and a little rough in the mornings." He cleared his throat a lot before he spoke, like he was making sure the words were ready before he let them out. She paused. He laughed from somewhere deep, not his throat, lower than that. And when he said my name, he always said it like a question, even when it wasn't one. The granddaughter nodded, satisfied, and went back to coloring. And the woman lay down on the bed that night, on her side, facing his side, and for the first time, she did not replay the words. She replayed the voice. Not what he said, but how he sounded saying it. And something in her chest loosened, not dramatically, not like a dam breaking, but like a knot that had been pulled so tight for so long that she had forgotten it was a knot. It loosened, just enough. The replaying, she understood now, had not been a search for meaning. It had been a way of holding on. And the holding had been so constant, so familiar, that she had mistaken it for thinking. She placed her hand on the empty space beside her. The cotton sheet was cool against her palm. The jasmine came through the window. The clock ticked. And she did not replay the conversation, not because she chose to stop, but because, for the first time, what she was holding felt light enough to set down. What her mind had been doing, this adding, this expanding, this turning a conversation about milk into a meditation on loss and love and the meaning of last words. The Buddha had a name for it. He called it Papanca. In the oldest teachings, preserved in a language called Pali, there is a sutta, the Madhupindika Sutta, that describes exactly this process. How the mind takes a single moment of contact, a single experience, and builds upon it, layer after layer, until the original moment is buried beneath a tower of interpretation. In the scene, the Buddha said, "Let there be only the scene. In the herd, only the herd." But the mind does not work that way. The mind takes what is seen and adds memory, takes what is heard and adds meaning, takes a conversation about milk and builds a cathedral of grief inside it. Papanca is not a flaw. It is what minds do. It is the engine that allowed us to plan harvests and write poetry and build cities. But at 2 in the morning, that same engine has nothing useful to build, and so it builds worry instead. Elaborate, detailed, architectural worry, with load-bearing walls and staircases that lead nowhere. Tonight, if you are replaying something, a conversation, a decision, a moment that will not stop returning, I wonder if you might notice something. The original moment was probably small. A few words, a look, a choice made quickly, and now questioned slowly. But the mind has added to it. It has added what you should have said, and what they probably thought, and what it means about you, and what might happen next, and what might have happened if you had done it differently. The original moment is still there, somewhere, small and simple, but it is buried now beneath 1,000 additions that the mind created in the dark. You are not remembering wrong. You are remembering more than happened. And the more you remember, the further you travel from the actual moment, which was, in all likelihood, just a conversation about milk. Let us visit one more person tonight before we rest. Someone who knows about the gap between intention and result, between what the mind demands and what the hands actually do. In a small studio above a tea shop, the kind of tea shop that has been in the same building for so long that no one remembers whether the building was built for the tea shop or the tea shop grew into the building. There lived a man who had spent 60 years writing a single character, not the same character every time. Of course, he was a calligrapher, and he knew thousands of characters, and his work hung in galleries and private collections, and in the homes of people who valued the particular beauty of ink on paper. But there was one character he returned to more than any other, the character for patience. He was 83 now. His studio was small. A low table, a single lamp, a brush stand carved from sandalwood that his teacher had given him 50 years ago. The walls were bare, except for the work he was currently studying, pinned at eye level so he could see it from the table. The floor was covered in sheets of rice paper, some crumpled, some torn, some bearing characters, so beautiful that a younger artist would have framed them. He threw them all away at the end of each session. Only the one on the wall stayed. The rain had been falling since afternoon, a steady, patient rain that did not announce itself, but simply continued, the way old grief continues, without drama, without crescendo, just the quiet persistence of water finding its way down. It tapped on the roof tiles above him, in a rhythm he had come to know. as well as his own breathing. The ink in the stone was fresh, ground that morning with water from the well behind the tea shop, a ritual he performed with the same slow attention, whether he planned to write one character or 100. The smell was sharp and mineral, like wet stone after a storm. Beside his elbow, a cup of tea had gone cold hours ago, forgotten, in the way that only someone completely absorbed can forget something within arm's reach. His hand trembled. It had started 2 years ago. A fine tremor, barely visible, that he could hide from visitors by keeping his hands in his sleeves. But the brush knew. The brush hid nothing. Every tremor was recorded in ink, permanent and unforgiving. And the mind that had spent 60 years seeking perfection now had 60 years of evidence that perfection was leaving, stroke by stroke. Tonight, he was writing the character for patience. Again, he had written it 37 times already this evening. Each time the mind commented, "That stroke is too thick. The tail curves left when it should curve right. The balance is off. The top is heavier than the bottom. Start again." And he started again. And the mind commented again. And so it continued, the mind producing criticism faster than the hand could produce ink. An endless loop of attempt and judgment. Attempt and judgment, each round adding another layer of frustration to the one before. This is what the mind does. It takes a single imperfect stroke and multiplies it into proof of decline, into evidence of wasted years, into a forecast of a future where the hands will not work at all. One crooked line becomes 1,000 conclusions. Bodhidharma, the old Zen master who sat facing a wall for 9 years, once said that not thinking about anything is Zen, that once you know this, walking, sitting, or lying down, everything you do is Zen. But the calligrapher had not yet learned how to stop thinking about the stroke. He had only learned how to keep making new ones. On the 38th attempt, his elbow caught the edge of the inkstone. It tipped. The ink spilled, a dark, spreading pool across the sheet of rice paper, shapeless and uncontrolled. Everything the calligrapher had spent his life avoiding. He stared at it. The ink moved slowly on the damp paper, following paths he had not drawn, filling spaces he had not intended, creating a shape that no amount of skill or trembling could have produced. It looked, in the lamplight, like a mountain seen through fog, or perhaps like a wave frozen mid-break, or perhaps like nothing at all, which was its beauty. It was not a character. It had no meaning. It was just ink, doing what ink does when no one tells it what to be. He sat with it for a long time. The rain continued. The cold tea sat beside him. The lamp flickered once, then steadied. Then he unpinned the character for patience from the wall. The one he had been studying all week, the one he considered his best work, and pinned up the ink spill instead. He looked at it. He nodded slowly, and then he cleaned his brush, put away his ink, and went to bed. He slept well that night, perhaps the best he had slept in months. The Buddha described this process, this mental proliferation, this papanca, as a chain. Contact leads to feeling. Feeling leads to perception. Perception leads to thinking. And thinking leads to proliferation. Here, the mind spinning outward in all directions, creating worlds of worry from a single point of contact. The calligrapher touched the inkstone with his elbow. That was the contact. The feeling was surprise. The perception was mistake. And the thinking. Oh, the thinking. The thinking could have gone on all night. ruined, wasted, clumsy, old, declining, finished. Each thought spawning 3 more. Each of those spawning 3 more, until the original moment, an elbow bumping a stone, was buried beneath an avalanche of meaning it never asked to carry. But something interrupted the chain. The ink was beautiful, and the beauty arrived before the thinking could. It slipped in through the gap between perception and proliferation, the way moonlight slips through a crack in the curtains. Uninvited, unexpected, and impossible to argue with. Perhaps right now, a thought is circling in your mind. Perhaps it has been circling since before you pressed play. A worry about tomorrow, a regret about yesterday, a conversation that will not stop rewriting itself. And perhaps, just perhaps, you can notice it's circling without adding the next thought to it, not stopping it, not judging it, just noticing the space between one loop and the next. That space is very small, but it is there, and in that space, the chain is already broken. There is an old Zen story, one of the oldest, about a student who came to the master, Bodhidharma, who had been sitting in meditation facing a wall for 9 years. The student was desperate. His mind would not stop. His worry was constant, relentless, exhausting. He knelt before Bodhidharma and said, "Master, my mind is not at peace. Please, pacify my mind." Bodhidharma did not move. He did not turn from the wall. He simply said, "Bring your mind to me, and I will pacify it for you." The student was quiet for a long time. He searched. He looked inward, the way you look for something you have dropped in the dark, carefully, thoroughly, with growing confusion. Where was the mind? He could feel the worry. Yes, the tightness in his chest, the restlessness in his legs, the thoughts that circled like birds that cannot find a place to land. But the mind itself, the thing that was doing the worrying, he could not locate it. It was everywhere and nowhere, like the sound of rain, once you stop trying to hear individual drops. "I have searched for my mind," the student finally said, "but I cannot find it." Bodhidharma said, "Then I have already pacified it." There was no technique, no instruction, no practice to adopt or habit to break. There was only the looking and the discovery that the thing you were afraid of, the thing that was keeping you awake, cannot actually be found when you go looking for it. It is like searching a dark room for the darkness itself. The moment you bring the lamp, the darkness is gone. Not because you defeated it, but because that is what darkness does when met with light. Let that settle for a moment. There is no need to understand it. These stories do their work whether you follow them with the mind, or simply let them wash over you, the way the rain washes over the calligrapher's roof. Steadily, patiently, without asking permission. Take a slow breath. Let your body find its weight again. Notice where you are. The bed beneath you, the pillow holding your head, the air moving in and out without your instruction. When you are ready, we will continue together. There is someone else I would like you to meet tonight. Someone who understands a different kind of worry, not the worry that replays the past or rehearses the future, but the worry we carry for the people we love. The heaviest kind, the kind that feels like compassion, but sometimes, in the smallest hours of the night, begins to feel like something else entirely. There is a kind of worry that does not belong to you. It wears your face and keeps your hours and sits in your chest as though it paid rent there. But when you look closely, really closely, you discover that it is not about you at all. It is about someone you love. And that makes it heavier, because a worry you carry for yourself, you can sometimes reason with. But a worry you carry for someone else has no argument that can reach it. It simply sits there, loyal and immovable, like a dog that will not leave the front door long after the person it is waiting for has stopped coming home. Let us take a breath here, a slow one, and let us visit a kitchen at 2 in the morning, in a house where the porch light was always left on. Not for safety, but out of a habit that began when her children were teenagers and has never stopped. A woman stood at the kitchen counter in the middle of the night, making tea she would not drink. She was 64. She had been a nurse for 31 years. The kind of nurse who remembered patients' names long after they were discharged. The kind who stayed late to hold a hand when there was nothing medical left to do. She had retired the previous spring, and the retirement had been fine, pleasant even, until her daughter's marriage began to come apart. The kitchen was lit by a single fluorescent tube that hummed at a frequency just below conscious hearing, the kind of sound you only notice when everything else is silent. The refrigerator was covered in photographs held by magnets from places she had never been. Her daughter's honeymoon in Portugal, a family reunion in the mountains, a birthday party where everyone was laughing and no one knew what was coming. The tea bag sat in the mug, slowly darkening the water from clear to amber. She would not drink it. She never drank the tea she made at 2 in the morning. Making it was not about drinking. It was about having something to do with her hands, while the mind did what the mind insisted on doing. Her daughter was going through a divorce. The details do not matter. They are the kind of details that feel enormous from the inside and ordinary from the outside. The kind that every family holds, at some point, the particular wreckage of two people who loved each other, discovering, slowly and then all at once, that love was not enough to make them compatible. What mattered was that her daughter was hurting. And what mattered more, what kept this woman awake at 2 in the morning with her untouched tea and her humming fluorescent light, was that she could not fix it. She had tried. She had offered advice, gently at first, then more directly, then in the careful, calibrated tone she had learned as a nurse. The tone that says, "I am not telling you what to do, but here is what I would do." Her daughter had listened politely, and then done none of it, which was her right, which was, in fact, exactly what a grown woman should do with her mother's advice about her own marriage. But knowing this did not help at 2 in the morning. The mind rehearsed. It replayed the phone call from last Tuesday, her daughter's voice flat and tired saying, "I am fine, Mom," in the way that means I am not fine, but I do not have the energy to explain. It imagined scenarios. Her daughter alone, in that apartment, eating cereal for dinner. The kind of loneliness that is worse than being alone, because it comes after being together. It composed letters she would never send. It rehearsed conversations she would never have. It carried the weight of her daughter's sadness, as though it were a physical object, a stone she had picked up and could not find a place to set down. She stood at the counter and looked at the tea. And then she remembered something. It came from far back, from the years when she still wore scrubs and carried a badge and walked the long corridors at night, checking on patients who could not sleep. There had been an old woman in room 412, 91 years old, clear-eyed, sharp-tongued, the kind of patient the younger nurses avoided, because she said exactly what she thought. The old woman had noticed her one night, standing in the doorway, watching a patient across the hall who was crying. A young mother whose child was in surgery. "You want to go in there," the old woman had said. It was not a question. "I should." "You should not. There is nothing in that room you can carry that she is not already carrying herself. I could sit with her. Sitting is fine, but that is not what you are doing. You are standing in the doorway, trying to feel what she feels, as though your feeling it would make her feel it less." The old woman had paused. It does not work that way. You cannot sleep someone else's sleep for them, and you cannot cry someone else's tears. You can only be in the room. That is enough. The woman poured the tea down the sink. She watched it swirl, amber darkening the white porcelain, then gone. She rinsed the mug. She turned off the fluorescent light, and she went back to bed. She did not sleep immediately. The worry was still there, still sitting in her chest, like something with weight and temperature. But she had stopped trying to solve it. She had stopped rehearsing the next conversation. She lay in the dark and felt the worry the way you feel rain through a window, aware of it, touched by it, but not standing in it. The kitchen was dark again. The porch light was still on. The magnets held the photographs in place, and the clock ticked with the same patience it had always had, measuring time that would pass whether she worried or not. Tonight, if you are carrying someone else's weight, if the worry that keeps you awake is not about your own life, but about someone you love, someone you cannot reach, someone whose pain you would take into your own body if the universe allowed that kind of transaction, then you know this woman. You know her kitchen. You know her tea. And you may know this truth that she is only now beginning to learn. There is a difference between caring about someone and carrying them. Caring leaves your hands free. Carrying does not. And the people you love, the ones you lie awake worrying about, they do not need you to carry them. They need you to still be standing when they are ready to reach for your hand. And you cannot stand if you have been carrying all night. The Buddha once observed that you can search the entire universe for someone more deserving of your love and affection than you are yourself, and that person is not to be found anywhere. This is not selfishness. It is the foundation. You cannot pour from an empty cup. You cannot offer rest to someone else while you yourself are running on no sleep and cold tea and the fluorescent hum of a worry that never turns off. There is an image I would like to offer you. Imagine a tree that grows beside a river. Its branches extend over the water, not because it decided to, but because that is how it grew. It shades the fish below. It cools the current. Leaves fall into the water, and the fish eat them. The tree gives and gives and gives. But it does not jump into the river to save the fish. It does not uproot itself to follow the current downstream. It does not drown in the giving. It simply stands where it stands, roots deep in the earth, branches reaching where they reach, offering what it can from where it is. This is compassion without drowning. This is love without self-abandonment. Most of you listening tonight are here for one of two reasons. Either the mind would not stop worrying, or you have learned that a quiet voice in the dark helps the body remember how to rest. Either way, you are welcome here. And either way, whether the worry is yours or whether you have borrowed it from someone you love, the invitation tonight is the same. You can set it down, not forever, not because it does not matter, but because you cannot hold it and rest at the same time. And right now, rest is what is needed most. Now let us go to a river at dawn. In a place where the river was wide enough that you could not see the far bank in the morning mist, only sense it, the way you sense a wall in a dark room before you touch it. A man operated a small ferry. It was not a grand vessel. It was a wooden boat with 2 oars and a bench that could seat 4 passengers, if none of them were large, and a rope attached to a post on each bank that he used in high water when the current was too strong for oars alone. He had been doing this for 38 years. Before him, his father had done it. Before his father, someone else whose name had been forgotten, but whose rope marks were still worn into the posts. He was 67. He lived alone in a small house on the near bank, a house that smelled of rope and river water, and the particular dampness that comes from living close to moving water your whole life. His wife had passed 3 years ago, and he had not changed anything in the house since. Her reading chair still faced the window. Her garden boots still stood by the back door. Her jar of dried flowers still sat on the kitchen table. The petals faded now to the color of old paper. He did not keep these things out of grief. He kept them because they were hers, and the house felt more honest with them in it. His hands were the hands of a man who had spent a lifetime gripping oars. Wide palms, thick fingers, calluses, layered upon calluses, until they were less like skin and more like the bark of the trees that lined the bank. The mist rose from the dark water in slow curls, catching the first weak light of dawn and turning it into something silver and hesitant, as though the day itself was not sure it wanted to arrive. The oarlocks creaked with each stroke, a sound so constant, so rhythmic, that it had become invisible to him, the way the sound of your own breathing is invisible until someone points it out. He carried people across. That was his job. But he had learned, over 38 years, that people brought more than their bodies onto the boat. They brought their stories, their complaints, their worries. A woman who was afraid her son would not pass his exams. A man who had just learned his business would fail. A young couple arguing about money in whispers. They thought he could not hear. An old woman who said nothing, but whose silence was heavier than all the words of the others combined. For the first 20 years, he had absorbed it all. Every story stuck to him the way river mist sticks to wool. Gradually, imperceptibly, until he was soaked through. He would lie awake at night, thinking about the woman's son, the man's business, the arguing couple. He carried them home. He carried them to bed. He carried them into his sleep, where they became his own worries, wearing other people's faces. Then something changed. It was not a dramatic moment. There was no teacher, no revelation, no bolt of understanding. It was simply that one morning, after a particularly heavy crossing, a man weeping on the bench, a burden so palpable that the boat seemed to sit lower in the water. He reached the far bank, and the man stepped off and the boat rose, just slightly, just enough to feel, and he realized the weight had belonged to the man, and the man had taken it with him when he left. The boat was light again. It had always been light. He had just forgotten. After that, He began to notice the moment of stepping off. Every passenger, every crossing, the moment they left the boat, the weight left with them. Not because he pushed it away, not because he refused to care, but because the weight was never his. He had been borrowing it, the way you borrow a coat in a rainstorm and then forget to return it. And slowly, the coat becomes part of your wardrobe, and you forget it was never yours. One morning, a passenger, a young woman with dark circles under her eyes, the kind that come from nights spent worrying rather than nights spent awake for pleasure, sat across from him and asked, "How are you so calm?" He looked at her. The mist was thinning. The birds had begun their first cautious calls from the reeds along the bank. "I am not calm," he said. "I have worries of my own. My back aches in winter. My wife's memory is fading in a way that frightens us both. My son lives far away and does not call as often as I would like. Then, how do you sit here every morning, looking like a man who has nothing to carry?" He rested the oars. The boat drifted with the current, slowly, the way conversations drift when no one is steering them. "I carry you across," he said. "I do not carry you home. I feel the weight of what you bring onto the boat. I notice it. Sometimes it is heavy enough that I adjust the oars. But when you step off, the weight goes with you, and I let it." "That sounds like not caring." "No," he said. "It is the only way I can keep caring. If I carried every passenger home, I would have drowned years ago. And then who would operate the ferry?" The young woman was quiet for the rest of the crossing. When she stepped off on the far bank, she paused and looked back at the boat. It sat higher in the water. He picked up the oars. The mist was clearing. The day was arriving, whether it wanted to or not. There is a word in the ancient Pali language, the language of the oldest Buddhist teachings, that captures exactly what the ferryman had learned. The word is karuna. It is usually translated as compassion, and that translation is not wrong, but it is incomplete. Because, in English, compassion often carries a hidden weight. The suggestion that, to truly care about someone's suffering, you must feel it yourself. You must take it on. You must suffer with them. Karuna does not ask you to suffer with anyone. It is the trembling of the heart, the genuine, unguarded trembling that wishes for another's suffering to end. But it is a trembling that knows, deeply and without shame, that you cannot end it for them. You can wish. You can be present. You can hold the space. But you cannot sleep someone else's sleep. You cannot carry someone else's weight across your own river. The difference between karuna and the kind of worry that keeps you awake at night is the difference between holding a candle for someone in the dark and setting yourself on fire to light their way. One sustains you. The other consumes you, and the people you love need you sustained, not consumed. Perhaps your hands have softened just slightly since we began this part of the journey. Perhaps the grip, the invisible grip that comes from holding someone else's worry, has loosened without your deciding to loosen it. You did not let go. Your body simply recognized that holding is optional, that the worry about the person you love, the one whose name came to mind just now, unbidden, the way certain names always come at night, that worry will still be there in the morning. It will keep. It does not need you to guard it through the night. And you, right now, in this bed, in this dark, you are allowed to set it down, not because it does not matter, but because you matter too. Let us rest here for a moment. Take a breath. Notice the weight of your body against the mattress. The way gravity holds you without effort, without judgment, without conditions. It holds you the same. Whether you are worried or calm, whether you slept last night or did not, whether you solved anything today or let everything remain unsolved. Gravity does not require your participation. It simply holds. And perhaps tonight, that is enough. To be held by something that does not ask you to hold it back. To rest in the arms of a world that will keep turning, whether you lie awake or fall asleep. The turning does not need your supervision. The night does not need your worry. It will become morning on its own. When you are ready, we will continue together. There is a question that comes next, a quieter one, a more surprising one. It is a question that the mind does not usually ask itself because it is afraid of the answer. The question is this: what if nothing needs fixing? Here is a question you may not have asked yourself tonight, though it has been waiting patiently at the edge of your mind since you lay down. The question is this: what if nothing needs fixing? Not what if everything is fine, because everything may not be fine, and pretending otherwise is its own kind of exhaustion. But what if the things that are not fine do not need you to fix them right now? What if the worry that keeps you awake is not a call to action, but a habit? A machine that runs because no one has told it to stop, long after the factory has closed for the night. The mind is a fixer. It was built that way. It scans for problems the way a lighthouse scans for ships, constantly, automatically, without being asked. And when it finds no problem, it invents one. Or it takes a small problem, a creak in the knee, a bill that is due next week, a conversation that felt slightly off, and enlarges it until it fills the room. The mind does not know how to rest, because resting, to the mind eye, looks like negligence, like leaving the lighthouse unattended, like letting the ships crash. But what if the ships are fine? What if the sea is calm? What if the lighthouse can go dark for one night, and the morning will still come? There is an old Zen story about a monk who came to the master Joshu, one of the most revered teachers in the Zen tradition, and asked a question that has been asked in meditation halls for over 1,000 years. The monk asked, "Does a dog have Buddha nature?" Now, in Buddhist teaching, the standard answer is yes, all beings have Buddha nature. It is doctrine. It is settled. The monk knew the answer before he asked. He was not looking for information. He was looking for something deeper. Joshu said one word: mu. Mu does not mean yes. It does not mean no. It means the question itself is the wrong question. It means you are standing at a door trying every key on your ring, and the door was never locked. What if the question you have been asking tonight: am I okay? Will this work out? Did I make the right choice? What if that question is also the wrong question? Not because the answer is yes or no, but because the asking itself is what is keeping you awake. The turning of the key, the rattling of the handle, the insistence that the door must be opened before you can rest. When the door was never locked, when the room on the other side is the same room you are already standing in. Let that settle. You do not need to understand it. Koans are not meant to be understood. They are meant to be sat with, the way you sit with rain. Not analyzing each drop, just letting it fall. In a garden at the edge of a small town. The kind of town where people knew each other's dogs by name and left tomatoes on each other's porches in August. A woman had spent the better part of 50 years growing things. She had begun with vegetables, practical, useful, the kind of growing that feeds a family. And over the decades, as the children left and the table grew smaller, the garden had slowly shifted from practical to beautiful. Roses along the fence, lavender by the gate, a border of marigolds that blazed orange every summer, like a line of small fires, obedient and bright. She was 74. Her knees had been replaced, both of them, and the new ones worked well enough on flat ground, but protested on slopes, in cold weather. And when kneeling, which is to say, they protested at everything a garden requires. Her back had developed its own opinions about bending, and her hands, strong hands, capable hands, hands that had delivered babies during her years as a midwife, and later coaxed rose bushes through winters that should have killed them. Her hands now ached in the mornings in a way that took 2 cups of tea to quiet. The garden was not what it had been. She knew this, the way you know your own face has changed, not from looking in the mirror, but from the expressions of people who haven't seen you in a while. The weeds had gained ground, the rose border had gaps where bushes had died, and she had not replaced them. The vegetable patch, once 12 raised beds, exact and productive, was down to 4, and even those 4 had a looseness about them, a wildness that would have horrified her younger self. She lay awake at night thinking about the garden, not in the pleasant way that gardeners think about their gardens, planning next season, imagining new arrangements, but in the worried way. The garden was falling apart. The garden was a measure of her decline. The garden was proof that she was losing the ability to maintain the things she had built. And if she could not maintain a garden, what else was slipping? The evening light came through the kitchen window and fell on the tomato plants in a way that turned their leaves translucent, golden green, almost glowing, as though they were lit from inside. The dirt was under her fingernails. Despite the gloves she wore, it was always under her fingernails. It had been under her fingernails for 50 years, and she had stopped apologizing for it 30 years ago. The air smelled of crushed basil. She had brushed against it coming in, and beneath that, the warm, mineral smell of earth that has been baking in the sun all day. Crickets had started their evening negotiations in the tall grass beyond the fence. The garden hose lay coiled near the spigot, like a sleeping snake, still warm from the afternoon. One morning, she walked out to survey the damage. That was how she thought of it now. Damage, and stopped at the corner of the garden, where the old herb bed used to be. She had abandoned it 2 seasons ago, when her knees made it too difficult to reach. The bed was untended, unwatered, unwatched, and it was full of wildflowers. She lowered herself onto the wooden bench at the garden's edge. The bench her husband had built 20 years ago from salvaged cedar. The one that now leaned slightly to the left in a way she found more honest than when it was new and straight, and trying too hard to be furniture. Not the kind she had planted. Not the disciplined, color-coordinated varieties from the nursery catalogue. These were unnamed things. Small white flowers with yellow centers, purple clusters that swayed in the slightest breeze. A sprawl of tiny blue blossoms that covered the ground like a whispered conversation. They had come from nowhere she could identify. Wind, perhaps. Birds. The particular alchemy of neglect and rain and soil. that knows what to do when no one is telling it what to be. She stood there for a long time. The morning was cool. A bee moved between the blue flowers with the focused intention of someone who knows exactly what they are looking for. And something shifted, not in the garden, but in her. The garden had not been falling apart. The garden had been becoming something else. Something she did not plan, did not control, did not approve. And it was more beautiful than anything she had ever arranged. She thought of something a neighbor had once said. A quiet man, a woodworker, who quoted things she later learned came from a Zen master named Dogen. To be in harmony with the wholeness of things is not to have anxiety over imperfections. She had dismissed it at the time. She was a gardener. Imperfections were her business. But standing here, looking at the wildflowers that had grown, because she stopped trying to make something grow, she understood it differently now. The imperfection was not the problem. The anxiety about the imperfection was the problem. The garden was not broken. Her idea of what the garden should be was the thing that would not let her rest. And this is the part that surprised her most, she tried to see it from the garden side. The soil beneath her feet had been turned and fed and planted and weeded for 50 years. It had done everything she asked. And the moment she stopped asking, it did what soil does when left to itself. It grew, not what she wanted, what it wanted. And what it wanted was wildflowers. The soil had never been trying to be perfect. It had been trying to grow. And those are not the same thing. She went inside. She washed her hands at the kitchen sink, watching the dark water swirl away, carrying 50 years of soil with it, and made her tea. The real kind, the kind she drank, not the 2 in the morning kind she made to keep her hands busy. And that night, for the first time in weeks, she did not lie awake thinking about the garden. She lay awake for a few minutes, out of habit, the way the body continues to brace itself even after the danger has passed. And then she slept, not because the garden was fixed, but because she had stopped believing it was broken. Tonight, what are you trying to fix? There is something. I can almost hear it humming beneath your breathing. Some project of self-improvement. Some campaign against a flaw. Some quiet war you have been waging against a part of yourself that will not behave. Perhaps it is the worry itself. Perhaps the thing you are trying to fix is the fact that you worry. And perhaps the effort of trying to stop worrying is itself the thing that is keeping you awake. Like trying to smooth water by pressing on it. The pressing creates the ripples you were trying to remove. Let us visit one more person. A man who spent his life fixing others and then turned that fixing on himself with predictable, exhausting results. In a study lined with books, medical textbooks on the upper shelves, novels and poetry on the lower ones, as though he had organized his life with the serious things on top and the beautiful things within reach. A man sat in a leather chair that had held his weight for 20 years and had molded itself to his shape in the way that only leather can, remembering every evening, every lean, every shift of position. He was 72. He had been a doctor for 40 years, a general practitioner in a small town, the kind of doctor who delivered the babies and then saw them through childhood illnesses and then treated their parents for the diseases of middle age and then, in time, held their grandparents' hands as they died. He had been the fixer, the one who looked at symptoms and found causes, the one who took broken things, broken bones, broken systems, broken rhythms of the heart, and put them right. He had retired 3 years ago, and the fixing had not stopped. It had merely turned inward. Every ache was a symptom. Every sleepless night was a sign. He diagnosed himself the way he had diagnosed patients. Methodically, thoroughly, with the particular cruelty of expertise turned against its owner. A twinge in the hip became osteoarthritis, became hip replacement, became recovery complications, became dependence. A moment of forgetfulness became early cognitive decline, became dementia, became a nursing home, became the loss of everything he valued about himself. The mind did not stop at the symptom. It raced ahead, building futures from single data points, constructing elaborate prognoses from the raw material of ordinary aging. His wife, who had never been to medical school, but who had lived with a doctor for 43 years, which is its own kind of education, had once told him very gently, over dinner, "You are not your own patient." He had nodded and agreed, and continued to be his own patient without interruption. He sat in his study at night with a medical journal open on his lap, reading about conditions he almost certainly did not have, in the way that medical professionals are uniquely capable of terrifying themselves. The desk lamp cast a warm circle on the page, leaving the rest of the room in shadow. The clock on the mantel ticked with the regularity that clocks maintain, and bodies do not. The smell of old paper and binding glue filled the room. A smell he loved, a smell that reminded him that knowledge, at least, does not decay. One evening, his granddaughter let herself into the study. She was 5. She did not knock, because 5-year-olds do not knock. They appear fully formed, in the spaces you thought were private, with the absolute confidence of someone who has not yet learned that entry requires permission. She climbed into his lap without asking. The medical journal slid to the floor. She arranged herself the way children arrange themselves on adults, without regard for comfort, for anatomy, for the protest of aging joints, and settled. Her hair smelled of soap, the kind of simple, clean smell that exists only in childhood and memory. She put her hand on his chest. "Grandpa," she said, "you're warm." That was all. Not "you look tired," not "are you feeling okay," not "is something wrong," just "you are warm." A diagnosis of the simplest kind, a reading of the only vital sign that matters. He looked down at her. She was already half asleep, the transition from awake to sleep that children make so effortlessly, as though consciousness were a coat they could simply take off and set aside. Her weight on his chest was real and present and unconcerned with what his blood pressure might be, or whether his hip would need replacing, or what the spots on his last scan might mean. She did not see a patient. She saw a warm person. The retired doctor sat very still. The clock ticked. The journal lay on the floor, open to a page about a condition he did not have. The lamp hummed, and he realized, with the quiet clarity that comes only when the mind stops its diagnostic machinery for a moment, he realized that he had been trying to fix something that was not broken. He had been diagnosing health as illness. He had been treating life as a series of symptoms to be managed, rather than a condition to be lived. He was warm. His granddaughter said so, and she was right. She was right. The way children are right. Not because they know more, but because they have not yet learned to add more than what is there. The book fell closed on the floor. The child breathed against his chest, and he was warm. There is a Pali word for this, for the state of things simply being what they are, without addition, without subtraction, without the mind's urgent need to make them into something they are not. The word is tathatha. It is usually translated as suchness, or things as they are. It does not mean everything is fine. It does not mean nothing is wrong. It means that what exists, exists. The ache in the hip exists. The wildflowers exist. The warm chest exists. The worry exists. They are all equally real, and none of them require your permission. The opposite of worry, the Buddha suggested, is not optimism. It is not the belief that everything will work out. It is presence, the willingness to be with what is, without adding the next chapter, without writing the ending, without diagnosing what might come. The Dhammapada, in one of its simplest and most often overlooked verses, says this: peace is the highest happiness, not joy, not excitement, not the thrill of problems solved. Peace, the kind that comes not from fixing, but from stopping. Perhaps right now, somewhere in your body, something has already stopped trying to fix. Perhaps a muscle you did not know was clenched, has softened. Perhaps the jaw, that faithful record keeper of every worry the mind has ever had, has released just slightly, the way a fist opens when the hand forgets why it was clenched. You did not decide this. The body decided it for you, because the body is wiser than the mind about these things. It knows that the thing you think is wrong with you, the sleeplessness, the worry, the inability to just relax, it knows that these are not malfunctions. They are not symptoms. They are simply what happens when a mind has been fixing for too long and has forgotten that rest is not a problem to solve. You are warm. Someone who loves you would say so. And that is not nothing. That is, in fact, everything. Take a breath. Let the body continue its quiet work of settling. The night is deeper now, and we have traveled far together. When you are ready, we will continue. But the next part of our journey will be quieter still. We will go not into the mind but into the body, into the places where worry lives, when it stops being a thought and becomes a feeling, into the shoulders, the jaw, the hands, the breath. The body has been listening all along. It is time we listen to it. We have been traveling through the mind tonight, through its habits of replaying, its patterns of worry, its impulse to fix and carry and control. But there is a place we have not visited yet, and it has been waiting. Not patiently. It does not know patience. It has simply been there, holding everything the mind has been producing, absorbing every worry like a sponge absorbs water, without complaint and without relief. That place is the body. And it is time we listen to what it has to say. In a room at the back of a small house, the kind of room that had started as a spare bedroom and over the years had been slowly conquered by fabric, thread, and the particular organized chaos of someone who creates things with her hands. A woman sat at a sewing machine at 11 o'clock at night. She was 62. She had been sewing since she was 9 years old, when her mother had placed her hands on the wheel of a singer and said, "This is how you make something from nothing." And she had been making something from nothing ever since. Curtains, dresses, quilts, alterations, repairs, the quiet endless work of stitching the world back together, one seam at a time. The sewing machine light was harsh, a small, bright bulb that cast sharp shadows and made everything look more urgent than it was. The table around her was piled with fabric in various states of intention. A bolt of cotton she had bought for a project she had not yet imagined, a half-finished blouse for a neighbor's daughter, a pile of scraps too small to use and too beautiful to throw away. The room smelled of cotton and machine oil, a combination so familiar that she no longer noticed it, the way you stop noticing the smell of your own kitchen. On a shelf above the machine sat her mother's thimble, brass, dented, too small for her fingers, but impossible to discard. It sat there like a small monument to the hands that had taught her hands. She was sewing to calm herself. This was her method. When the mind began its nightly inventory of things gone wrong and things that might go wrong, she came to the machine, the rhythm of the needle. Up, down, the fabric moving through her fingers like a slow river. Usually quieted the thoughts the way white noise quiets a restless room. But tonight, even the needle was not cooperating. The thread caught, the bobbin jammed. The seam she was trying to make straight kept drifting to the left, as though the fabric itself had opinions she had not consulted. She did not notice that her shoulders were locked, pulled up toward her ears in that particular posture of bracing that the body adopts when the mind is at war with something invisible. She did not notice that her jaw was clenched, the molars pressed together with a pressure that, had she been aware of it, she would have recognized as the physical signature of every unsaid thing she had swallowed that week. Her stomach was tight, a knot sitting just below the ribs, the kind that does not respond to antacids, because it is not caused by acid. It is caused by the body doing the work the mind refuses to acknowledge. She had been trying to think her way out of the anxiety for years. If she could just find the right perspective, the right reassurance, the right logical argument against the worry, it would stop. She had read books about it. She had made lists, things she was grateful for, things that were going well, things that could be worse. The lists were accurate. They were convincing. They convinced no one, least of all the knot below her ribs. She reached for a new spool of thread, white, the kind she used most, the invisible mending thread that fixes things so cleanly you cannot see where the tear was. And it slipped from her fingers. It fell to the floor and rolled under the table, trailing a thin line behind it like a thought that will not stop unspooling. She bent to pick it up, and in the bending, the folding of her body forward, the sudden compression of the chest, she noticed her breath. It was shallow, quick, tight, as though her lungs had been allocated only half their capacity, and were trying to run the whole system on reduced supply. She had not noticed this. She had been breathing this way for hours, perhaps days, and had not noticed, because the mind was so busy thinking about the worry that it had forgotten to check on the body that was holding it. She sat up slowly. The spool of thread was in her hand. The machine was silent. The clock ticked, and for the first time, she understood something. The worry was not just in her head. It had never been just in her head. It lived in her shoulders, in her jaw, in the knot beneath her ribs, in the shallow breath she had not noticed until she bent to pick up a spool of thread. The body had been carrying the worry the whole time, faithfully, silently, without complaint. And she had been so focused on fixing the thoughts that she had never once looked at where the thoughts had taken up residence. She put down the needle. She put down the thread. She put her hands in her lap, not doing anything with them, which was perhaps the most unusual thing she had done with her hands in 53 years of making something from nothing. And she sat. That was all. She sat. The sewing machine was silent. The clock ticked. The fabric waited, and her shoulders, for the first time in what felt like weeks, began, slowly and without permission, to drop. What the seamstress had discovered. This shift from the head to the body, from thinking about the feeling to feeling the feeling, is one of the oldest teachings in the Buddhist tradition. In the Satipatthana Sutta, the Buddha's foundational instruction on mindfulness, there is a phrase that has been practiced for 25 centuries. One dwells contemplating feelings in feelings, ardent, clearly comprehending. Not feelings as emotions, feelings as sensations. The raw physical data that the body produces before the mind has time to make a story out of it. The tightness, the warmth, the weight, the ache, the particular vibration that worry produces in the chest. Different from the vibration of sadness, different from the vibration of anger, each one as specific and identifiable as a fingerprint. If you slow down enough to read it, the body has been keeping score tonight. Whatever the mind has been worrying about, whatever conversation it has been replaying, whatever future it has been rehearsing, whatever weight it has been carrying for someone else, the body has been registering all of it, not in thoughts, in sensations, and the sensations are still there right now as you listen. In the shoulders, in the jaw, in the space behind your eyes, in the hands which may be holding something. A pillow, a blanket, the edge of the mattress, with more force than the object requires. Right now, your body is holding something. It may be obvious. A tension in the neck you have been aware of all day. Or it may be subtle. Something you notice only when someone says the word shoulders, and your attention drifts there and finds, to your surprise, that they have been elevated for hours without your knowledge. The worry you have been thinking about has a body. It has a temperature. It has a texture. It has a location. And when you find it, when you stop being lost in the story of the worry, and instead turn your attention to the place in the body where the worry lives, something changes. Not dramatically, not like a switch, more like a door that was stuck and now opens an inch, just an inch. But that inch is enough. In an apiary at the edge of a meadow, where the last light of the day turned everything to amber, and the air was thick with the smell of honey and warm wood, and the particular sweetness of beeswax softening in the sun. A woman stood among 10,000 bees. She was 58. Her hair was pulled back under a wide-brimmed hat, but she wore no veil, no gloves, no suit. Her arms were bare to the elbows, her hands open and loose at her sides. The bees moved around her, the way water moves around a stone in a stream, easily, without collision, as though she were a part of the landscape rather than an intrusion upon it. They landed on her forearms and lifted off again. They circled her head and moved on. None of them stung, not because she was immune, not because these were gentle bees, but because her body had learned something. Her mind could not teach it. It had not always been this way. When she had first come to the bees, 15 years ago, after a divorce that left her with a small house, an overgrown garden, and the sudden disorienting freedom of having no one scheduled to accommodate but her own. She had been afraid. Her body was stiff, her hands clenched around the smoker with white-knuckled intensity. Her breath was shallow and rapid, and her movements were sharp, sudden, full of the particular urgency of someone who expects pain and is bracing for it. The bees stung her constantly. Not out of malice. Bees do not sting out of malice any more than rain falls out of spite. They stung because her body was broadcasting fear through its posture, its tension, its chemical signature of cortisol and adrenaline. And to the bees, fear registers as threat. They were not attacking her. They were defending themselves against the alarm her own body was sounding. The old beekeeper who taught her, a man of 80, whose hands were so gentle that he could lift a queen from a hive without disturbing a single worker, watched her for 3 weeks before he said anything. Then, one evening, as she was treating another sting on her forearm with a paste of baking soda and frustration, he sat beside her and said, very simply, "The bees are not the problem." She waited. "Your body is loud," he said. "It is shouting. Every muscle, every breath, every movement you make tells them, I am afraid, I am dangerous, something is wrong." He paused. "They believe you. How do I fix it?" He smiled, the particular smile of someone who has watched many students ask that exact question. You do not fix it. You soften it. Slow your breath. Not dramatically, just a little slower than feels natural. Let the inhale be longer than you think it needs to be. Soften your hands, not limp. Soft. There is a difference. And move as though you belong there, not as a visitor, as a resident. That's it. That is everything. The bees do not hear your thoughts. They feel your body. When your body says, I am safe, they believe that too. She did not believe him, but she had been stung 14 times that month, so she tried. It took 3 months. 3 months of deliberately slowing the breath beside the hives. 3 months of softening her hands until they stopped gripping and started resting. 3 months of walking among the bees as though she had always been there. As though she were not a woman from the suburbs who had taken up beekeeping. To fill the silence of a house that used to hold 2 people, but a creature of the meadow who had been born to the hum and the honey and the golden light. And it worked, not because the bees changed, because her body changed. And the bees, who had never been interested in her thoughts, who could not hear her anxiety, her divorce, her loneliness, her fear of growing old alone. The bees simply responded to what they could feel, and what they felt, eventually, was calm. She stood among them now, 10,000 bees, each one capable of stinging, none of them bothering, and she understood what the old Zen master Yunmen had meant when he said, when walking, just walk. When sitting, just sit. Above all, don't wobble. She was not wobbling. She was standing, softly, openly, with bare hands and a steady breath. And the bees, 10,000 tiny mirrors, reflected back to her the peace her body had finally learned to hold. There is one more small story before we rest this thought. It is very brief, and it requires no commentary. A man lies in bed at night. He cannot sleep. He decides not to fix the sleeplessness, not to analyze it, not to strategize about it, but simply to listen to his body, the way you might listen to a house at night, hearing its creaks and sighs and the sounds it makes. When it thinks no one is paying attention. He starts with his shoulders. They are elevated, not dramatically, but noticeably, as though they have been trying to touch his ears and gave up halfway. He does not tell them to drop. He just notices. His shoulder says, "I have been holding this since Tuesday." He does not remember what happened on Tuesday. He runs through the week, meetings, errands, conversations, the ordinary traffic of a life in motion. And nothing stands out. Nothing remarkable happened on Tuesday. But his shoulder remembers. His shoulder knows that on Tuesday afternoon, a phone call came that changed nothing but shifted everything. A tone in someone's voice, a hesitation before an answer, a small silence that lasted one beat too long. The mind processed it and moved on. The shoulder held it. And it has been holding it for 4 days, without acknowledgement, without relief, without anyone noticing, until now. The man does not massage his shoulder. He does not stretch. He does not do anything at all. He simply acknowledges it. "You have been holding something since Tuesday," he says silently to his own body. "I see you." And the shoulder, not immediately, not dramatically, but with the slow exhale of something that has been waiting to be seen, begins to release. The Pali word Vedana points to something very precise. It does not mean emotion, not the complex storyline feelings we call sadness, anger, joy, regret. It means something simpler. It means the raw, pre-verbal tone of an experience, pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. Before the mind tells you what you are feeling, the body has already registered it. Before the story begins, the story of why you are worried, what caused it, what it means, what might happen, the body has already felt the worry as a sensation, a tightness, a heaviness, a temperature change, a constriction in the breath. This is Vedana. The feeling before the feeling, the body's first draft, before the mind begins its revisions. And here is the quiet revolution the Buddha offered. You do not need to engage with the mind's revisions. You do not need to read the story the mind builds on top of the sensation. You can stay with the sensation itself, the tightness, the warmth, the weight, and simply notice it, not fix it, not analyze it, not write a better ending, just notice. Perhaps there is a place in your body, right now, where tonight's worry is sitting. You may already know where it is. It may have been there since before you pressed play. A familiar resident in a familiar location. Or perhaps, as you turn your attention to it, you are discovering it for the first time. A tension you did not know was there. A holding you did not know you were doing. Either way, it is real, and it has been waiting, not for you to fix it, but for you to find it, to say silently. The way you might speak to a child who has been standing in the doorway too long, afraid to come in. "I see you. You can come in now. You can sit down." The body has been listening to these stories all night. It has been doing its own work, its own slow, wordless loosening, while the mind followed the narratives. And perhaps by now, something has shifted. Perhaps the shoulders have dropped a 1/4 inch. Perhaps the jaw has softened by a degree. Perhaps the hands, wherever they are, have stopped gripping and started resting. You did not decide this. The body decided. Because the body, when given the chance, knows how to let go of things the mind insists on carrying. Let us rest here. The night has grown deeper. The air is cooler now, and wherever you are, in whatever bed, in whatever room, in whatever country, at whatever hour, The body beneath you is doing what bodies do when given permission. It is settling. Let it settle. When you are ready, we will continue together. The next part of our journey is about something we rarely discuss: the strange, particular discomfort of not knowing, of lying in the dark without an answer, of sitting with uncertainty the way the ferryman sits with the river, not trying to stop it, not trying to redirect it, just watching it flow. There is a particular kind of wakefulness that comes not from what has happened, but from what has not happened yet. It is the wakefulness of waiting for a phone call, for test results, for an answer that may arrive tomorrow or next week, or never. The mind does not replay here. It does not return to the past. Instead, it reaches forward into a future it cannot see, and the darkness it finds, there is not the comfortable darkness of a bedroom at night, but the other kind, the kind that means I do not know. Let us sit with that tonight, not to fix it, not to fill it with false reassurance, just to sit with it, the way you sit with someone who is crying, not because you have the right words, but because your presence is the only thing that matters. In a house where the kitchen table had been cleared of everything except blueprints and a cup of coffee that had gone cold. 3 hours ago, a woman sat at 3 in the morning, doing what she had always done when the world felt unsteady. She was drawing. She was 64. She had been an architect for 37 years. The kind of architect who designed not the grand buildings that win awards and appear in magazines, but the quiet ones. Schools, libraries, a community center in a town that could not afford much, but wanted something beautiful anyway. She designed buildings that held people, and she designed them well. Her pencils were arranged by hardness in a leather case her father had given her when she graduated. 6H to 6B, light to dark, precise to expressive. Each one sharpened to the same angle, with a blade she kept in the case's small pocket. The graphite smell was in her fingers always. Her colleagues used to joke that she could be identified by scent alone, pencil lead and cold coffee, and the particular ozone smell of a photocopier that had been running all day. The blueprints on the table were not for a building. They were old. Projects from 20, 30 years ago. And she had pulled them from the filing cabinet in the basement, the way someone else might pull out old photographs, not to admire them, to remember what certainty felt like. Here was the community center. Every beam calculated, every load distributed, every measurement checked twice, and then checked again. Here was the elementary school, the one she had designed, so that every classroom had a window facing east, because she believed that children should begin their day in sunlight. Here was the library, her favorite, the one with the reading room, whose ceiling was high enough to hold silence, the way a cathedral holds prayer. Every one of these buildings was still standing. Everyone had been built on her certainty, her absolute, unshakable confidence that if the numbers were right and the materials were sound and the foundation was deep enough, the structure would hold. But tonight she was not thinking about buildings. She was thinking about a phone call she had received that afternoon, the kind of phone call that divides time into before and after. A scan had shown something. The doctor had used the word inconclusive, which is the medical profession's way of saying we do not know yet, delivered in a tone designed to sound calm while communicating the opposite. There would be more tests. There would be waiting. There would be And this was the part that kept her awake. Uncertainty. She did not know how to sit with uncertainty. Her entire career had been built on eliminating it. You do not design a building and hope it stands. You calculate, you test, you account for wind load and seismic activity and soil composition and the weight of snow on a flat roof in February. You eliminate every variable you can, and then you build, and it stands. Because you made sure it would. But this thing in her body, this shadow on a scan, could not be calculated. There was no blueprint for it. No load-bearing wall to distribute the weight. No foundation deep enough to guarantee the structure would hold. She stared at the old blueprints. The moonlight came through the kitchen window and fell on the paper, turning the blue lines silver. The house creaked. The particular settling sound that houses make in the small hours. A sound she had always found comforting because she understood its mechanics. Wood contracts in cold air, joints shift. The house is not falling apart, it is breathing. And then, sitting there with her cold coffee and her silver-lit blueprints and her uncertainty, she noticed something she had never considered in 37 years of designing buildings. Every building she had ever designed was built on ground that could move. Not theoretically. Actually, the elementary school sat on clay soil that expanded in wet years and contracted in dry ones. The library was in a seismic zone. Not a dramatic one. Not the kind that makes the news. But the kind where the earth shifts a fraction of an inch every decade. Enough that the foundation had to be designed to absorb movement rather than resist it. The community center was built on a hillside that had been declared stable by geologists. But stable in geological terms means it probably will not move in the next 1,000 years, which is not the same as certainly. She had always known this. It was the first thing they taught in structural engineering, that the ground is not fixed. That certainty in architecture is not the absence of movement, but the ability to accommodate it. A rigid building breaks. A flexible building stands. The best structures are not the ones that refuse to move, but the ones that know how to move without collapsing. She had spent her life building beautifully on uncertain ground. She had just never applied that knowledge to herself. The coffee was cold. The blueprints were old. The moonlight shifted as a cloud passed. And she understood, not with her mind, which was still busy trying to calculate the odds, but with something deeper, that she had always lived with uncertainty. She had just called it something else. She had called it engineering. She folded the blueprints. She rinsed the coffee cup. She went to bed. She did not sleep immediately. The mind still hummed, still reached for numbers, still tried to build a structure around the unknowing. But the reaching was gentler now, less desperate, more like the gentle sway of a building designed to move with the wind rather than against it. The Buddha's last recorded words, spoken as he lay dying, surrounded by monks who were weeping because the one person who seemed to have all the answers was about to leave them without any. His last words were about this. All conditioned things are impermanent, he said. Strive on with diligence. Not, everything will be fine. Not, do not worry. Simply, everything that arises will pass. That is the nature of things. And your work is not to stop the passing, but to be present while it happens. The Pali word for this is anicca. It is usually translated as impermanence. And that translation is accurate but misleading, because in English, impermanence sounds like loss. It sounds like everything you love will be taken away. But anicca does not mean everything ends. It means everything moves. The river does not end. It flows. The breath does not end. It changes. Inhale becomes exhale, becomes inhale. The night does not end. It becomes morning. And the uncertainty you are feeling right now, the not knowing that sits in your chest like a stone, it is not a permanent state. It is a weather, and like all weather, it will change. Not because you forced it to, but because that is what weather does. On a porch in a town where the summers were long and the nights were warm enough to sit outside until the stars came out, a woman in her late 70s sat in a rocking chair that had been on that porch longer than she had lived in the house. The chair had belonged to her mother-in-law, who had belonged to the house, who had belonged to the town, who had belonged to a time when porches were where life happened, where babies were rocked and arguments were had and decisions were made, and nothing was ever decided indoors, if it could be decided in the open air. She was not rocking. She was sitting very still, which was unusual for her. She was a woman of motion, a woman who had spent 50 years as a midwife, which is a profession that does not allow stillness. Her hands, even in retirement, were always doing something. Shelling peas, folding laundry, writing letters to people who would never write back. But tonight, her hands were in her lap, doing nothing. And that was how her granddaughter knew something was wrong. The granddaughter was 17. She had come through the screen door barefoot, holding a glass of water she had not been asked to bring, which is the language teenagers use when they want to say, "I noticed you are not okay, but I do not know how to say that." She set the water on the porch railing and sat on the top step facing the yard. The crickets were loud, the thick layered sound of a summer night that is full of things you cannot see. The jasmine along the fence was blooming, and its sweetness hung in the air like something you could almost touch. Lightning bugs drifted across the grass in their slow, purposeless way, blinking their small, cold lights as though they were trying to spell something, but kept forgetting the letters. "Grandma, yes. Are you scared?" The grandmother looked at her. The granddaughter was not facing her. She was looking at the yard, at the lightning bugs, at the darkness beyond the fence, but the question was as direct as a hand on the shoulder. "Yes," the grandmother said. "About Grandpa?" "Yes." Her husband was in the hospital. The diagnosis was uncertain. That word again, the word that means we are doing our best. But the body has its own plans. He might come home next week. He might not come home the way he left. The doctors spoke in probabilities, which is the language of people who know things, but not the thing you are asking about. "Is that okay?" the granddaughter asked. The grandmother almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because the question was so simple that it bypassed every defense she had built. The competence, the experience, the 50 years of walking into rooms where women were screaming and calmly saying, "I am here. We will get through this. Breathe." She had spent her entire career being the person who was not scared. The person who held the fear for others so they could do the impossible work of bringing life into the world. She had been the steady one, the calm one, the one who knew. And here was a 17-year-old sitting on a porch step in bare feet, asking the one question no one had ever asked her. Is it okay to be scared? I don't know, she said. And then more quietly, I think so. I think it has to be. The granddaughter nodded, as though this were the most obvious thing in the world. Because you're always telling Mum that being scared during labor is normal, she said. That it doesn't mean something is wrong, it just means something big is happening. The grandmother was very still. Something big is happening, the granddaughter said. Not as comfort, not as wisdom, just as a fact, stated the way teenagers state facts, without ceremony, without softening, without the careful padding that adults wrap around difficult truths to make them easier to hold. The grandmother looked at her granddaughter. The lightning bugs blinked. The crickets sang. The jasmine sweetened the air. And she understood that she had spent 50 years teaching women that fear in the face of uncertainty was not weakness. It was the body's honest response to something enormous. And she had never once applied that teaching to herself. The permission to be scared had always been something she gave to others. She had never considered that she might need it too. And it had come from a 17-year-old on a porch step. The one who was supposed to need comforting had done the comforting. The one who was supposed to be wise had received the wisdom. The teacher had been taught. And the lesson was the simplest one of all. You are scared, and that is okay, because something big is happening. They sat together for a long time after that. The grandmother did not rock. The granddaughter did not leave. Neither of them had answers. Neither of them needed them. They just sat. Two people on a porch, in the dark, with the crickets and the jasmine and the not knowing, and it was enough. What the architect discovered in her blueprints and the grandmother received from her granddaughter is the same teaching the Buddha offered 25 centuries ago, and it is simpler than the mind wants it to be. The mind wants a plan. It wants a prognosis. It wants to know whether the scan will be clear, whether the husband will come home, whether the morning will bring relief or more waiting. And the teaching says, you will not know until you know. And in the meantime, you are here. And here is not a lesser place. Here is the only place. Anicca does not ask you to be brave. It does not ask you to pretend the uncertainty does not hurt. It simply points out what you already know, but keep forgetting. You have been uncertain before. You have lain in the dark before, without knowing what the morning would bring. And the morning came. It always came. Not always with the answer you wanted, but it came, and you were there to meet it. You have survived every uncertainty you have ever faced, every single one. Your record is perfect. There is one more small moment before we rest this thought. A woman lies awake at 2 in the morning. Her phone is on the nightstand, face up, the screen, dark. She is waiting for a message. It does not matter from whom or about what. You know this woman because you have been this woman. The waiting is the thing, the checking, the lifting of the phone, to see if something has arrived in the 30 seconds since she last looked. She picks up the phone. No message. She puts it down. She picks it up again. No message. The screen's blue light touches her face briefly, then goes dark. The ceiling returns. The silence returns. The waiting returns. On the third reach, she stops. Her hand is already moving toward the nightstand, already anticipating the weight of the phone, the slide of the thumb, the disappointment of an empty screen. But she stops. Not because she has decided not to check, not because she has disciplined herself into patience, but because she is suddenly, briefly, exhausted by the reaching. And in that exhaustion, in that one moment of not reaching, she feels the bed beneath her. She feels the pillow. She feels the weight of the blanket on her legs. She feels, for just a moment, what it is like to be here without reaching for there. She turns the phone face down. The screen's glow disappears. The room is dark again, fully dark, the kind of dark that hides nothing because there is nothing to hide. And she lies there, in the not knowing, and the not knowing does not kill her. It does not even hurt, exactly. It is just uncomfortable, the way a new pair of shoes is uncomfortable. Not because something is wrong, but because you have not worn them enough yet. The message will come or it will not. The morning will bring what it brings. She has no control over either, and that, the absolute, total, humbling lack of control, is not a failure. It is the truth, and the truth, even when it is uncomfortable, is lighter than the lie of pretending you can control what you cannot. Perhaps right now, you are waiting for something. A result, a response, an answer to a question you asked days or weeks ago that has not yet been answered. And perhaps the waiting is the thing that brought you here tonight. Not the worry about the past, not the grief, not the carrying, but the simple, awful, ordinary experience of not knowing. If so, you are in good company. Every person who has ever lived has lain in the dark not knowing. Every person who has ever breathed has reached for a certainty that was not there. And every person who has ever fallen asleep has done so, not because the answers arrived, but because the body, at some point, simply decided that the not knowing could wait until morning. Your body is making that decision now. You may not feel it yet. The mind may still be reaching, still checking, still calculating probabilities in the dark. But the body has already begun its slow departure from wakefulness. The breath has deepened by a fraction. The muscles have released by a degree. The eyelids are heavier than they were 10 minutes ago. You did not decide this. The body decided. Because the body knows something the mind has not yet learned. That you can rest without knowing. That sleep does not require answers. That the morning will come, whether you plan for it or not. Let it come. Let the not knowing be. Let the phone stay face down. Let the morning do what mornings do. Arrive. Quietly, without asking permission, carrying whatever it carries, setting it down at your feet like a gift you did not order, but cannot return. When you are ready, we will continue into the last part of our journey together. The stories are growing quieter now. The night is growing deeper, and somewhere beneath all the worry and the waiting and the not knowing, there is a quiet that has been there all along, patient, steady, unbroken. It was there before you pressed play. It will be there after the last word is spoken. It is the quiet that does not depend on silence. It is yours, and we are almost there. Beneath everything we have traveled through tonight, the replaying, and the carrying, and the fixing, and the holding, and the not knowing. Beneath all of it, there is something that has not moved. It has not been disturbed by the worry. It has not been touched by the sleeplessness. It has been there since before you pressed play, since before you lay down, since before whatever happened today that brought the worry to the surface. It is the quiet that was always there, and it has been waiting. Not for you to find it, but for you to stop looking for it. Because it was never lost. In a library after closing. The last one to leave. As always, because someone had to turn off the lights and she had decided 30 years ago that the someone should be her. A woman walked between the shelves in the near dark, running her fingers along the spines of books the way you might run your hand along a fence as you walk past it. She was 68. She had been a librarian for her entire adult life, which is to say she had spent 44 years in the company of silence and had never once grown tired of it. The library was small, a single room really, with high windows and wooden floors that creaked in the places she had memorized. The last lamp was on. The reading lamp at the back table. The one she always turned off last, because it cast the particular amber glow that made the room feel less like a public building and more like someone's study. The heating vent hummed. The clock above the door ticked with the steady patience of a thing that has never been in a hurry. And between those two sounds, the hum and the tick, there was the silence. Not the absence of sound, the presence of quiet. A quiet so specific, so textured, that she could have recognized this room blindfolded, the way you recognize a person by the sound of their breathing. She had always loved this moment. The after hours, when the patrons had gone, and the books were back on the shelves, and the chairs were empty, and the room returned to itself. The carpet was the color of moss, faded now, worn thin along the paths between the shelves, where decades of feet had traced the same roots. The air smelled of paper and binding glue, and the faint cedar of the old card catalogue that she kept. Even though everything was digital now, because some things deserved to exist beyond their usefulness. During the day, the library was full of noise. Quiet noise, library-appropriate noise, but noise nonetheless. The rustle of pages, the squeak of chairs, the whispered conversations that people believed were inaudible, but were, in fact, perfectly clear to someone who had spent 44 years listening. Children's programs on Tuesday mornings, the photocopier's mechanical sigh, the beep of the scanner at the checkout desk, all day noise, and then at closing, like a tide going out. Silence, not sudden, gradual, the last patron leaving, the last chair pushed in, the last light turned off, one by one, until only the amber lamp remained. She had been sleeping badly, not because of any particular worry. She had worries, of course, the ordinary worries of a woman approaching 70, whose body was beginning to send memos about its revised policies regarding knees, sleep, and the digestion of certain foods after 8 p.m. But the sleeplessness was not about those worries. It was about something she could not name. A restlessness. A hum beneath the surface, like the heating vent, but inside her, constant, low, impossible to turn off. Someone once described worry to me as the mind's tension over things that have not yet satisfied us. A restlessness about the past and anxiety about the future. A constant back and forth between what we failed to do and what we fear might come. In Buddhist teaching, there is a simpler name for this state. It is called living without mindfulness, not because the worried person is careless or inattentive. Often, the opposite is true. The worried mind is excruciatingly attentive. But because the attention is pointed in the wrong direction, it is pointed backward, at what has already happened, or forward, at what might happen. And the one place it is not pointed, the present, the here, the now, the amber lamp and the creaking floor and the silence between the hum and the tick. That place goes unnoticed, not because it is hidden, because the mind is too busy looking elsewhere to see what is right in front of it. The librarian stood in the quiet room and listened. Not for anything, just listened. The way you listen to rain when you have nowhere to be. And the quiet, the specific, textured, amber-lit quiet of this room entered her the way water enters a sponge. Not dramatically, not with revelation or insight, or any of the words that spiritual traditions use to describe moments of transformation. It simply entered, and the hum, the internal one, the one she could not name or locate or turn off, the hum softened, not because she did anything, because the quiet was louder. She remembered standing there, a man who had come to the library every day for 2 years. He was old, 80s perhaps older, with a face that looked like it had been folded and unfolded many times. Each crease, a record of something weathered. He came at 10 in the morning, sat in the chair by the back window, always that chair, and stayed until closing. He brought no book, he read nothing. He did not use the computer, or the periodicals or the reference section. He simply sat. She had watched him for months before she asked. It was not her habit to question patrons. The library was a place where people were allowed to be without explanation. But curiosity eventually overcame protocol. "May I ask," she said, standing beside his chair one afternoon, "what brings you here every day?" He looked up at her. His eyes were clear, the kind of clarity that comes not from youth, but from having looked at things for a very long time without flinching. "This is the quietest place I know," he said. "You come here for the quiet. I come here because the quiet is already here. I do not have to make it. I do not have to earn it. I just have to sit in it." He paused. His hands were resting on the arms of the chair. Large hands, steady, the kind that looked like they had built things, or repaired things, or held things together for a long time. At home, even when the house is silent, the silence feels like something I have to maintain. If I drop a cup, I have broken it. If I turn on the television, I have lost it. The silence at home is fragile. It depends on me. He looked around the room, at the shelves, the windows, the amber lamp casting its patient glow. Here, someone else has already done the maintaining. The quiet belongs to the room. I am just borrowing it. She wanted to ask more. What he had done before, what kept him awake, what the silence at home was hiding. But he had already returned his gaze to the window, and she recognized the gesture. It was the same gesture every librarian knows. The gentle closing of a conversation that has said exactly enough, and not one word more. She understood now, standing alone in that same quiet, that the old man had found something she was only beginning to discover. The quiet was not something you created. It was not the product of effort or discipline or the right meditation technique. It was already here. It had always been here. Beneath the noise of the day, beneath the hum of the heating vent, beneath the tick of the clock, beneath the worry that kept her awake at night. The quiet was the room's natural state. The noise was the visitor, and every evening, when the visitors left, the room returned to what it had always been. On the other side of the city, at the same hour, in a different kind of silence, a woman sat in the driver's seat of an empty bus at the end of the route. The engine was off. The interior lights had dimmed to their nighttime setting. A pale blue glow that turned the empty seats into rows of shadows. She was 61. She had come to this job late, after a career in nursing that had ended not with burnout, but with a quieter realization that she needed to be alone more than she needed to be needed. The bus suited her. The night route suited her even more. The passengers at midnight were different from daytime passengers. Quieter, less demanding, more grateful for a door that opened, and a warm seat and a driver who did not make conversation, unless invited. She had been driving the night route for 14 years, and she had come to think of this moment, the moment after the last passenger stepped off, and the doors closed, and the bus was hers alone, as the best part of her shift. The city was visible through the windshield, street lights and traffic signals, and the lit windows of apartments where people were still awake, still watching, still scrolling, still doing whatever people do at midnight when they should be sleeping. The bus smelled of diesel and upholstery, and the faint ghost of someone's perfume. 3 passengers ago, still lingering in the recycled air. Her hands rested on the steering wheel, not gripping, just resting, and the leather was warm from her palms. She thought of a woman she had driven 2 months ago. The woman had boarded at the first stop, the beginning of the route, downtown, where the buses are full and the passengers are loud. She had sat in the back row and looked out the window. Normal enough, but when the bus reached the end of the route, 45 minutes later, the last stop, the turnaround point in a neighborhood where the streetlights are fewer and the darkness is real, the woman did not get off. Last stop, the driver called. The woman looked up. "I know," she said. "May I ride back?" It was not a common request, but it was not against the rules. The driver nodded. The woman stayed. And when the bus reached downtown again, the full loop, 90 minutes she rode, back once more. 3 full circuits, 4.5 hours, through the same streets, past the same stops, under the same lights. At the end of the 3rd circuit, the driver could not help herself. "Are you all right?" The woman stood. She was perhaps 50, perhaps older. It was hard to tell in the blue light. She looked tired, but not distressed, more like someone who had been carrying something heavy and had finally found a bench. "The motion helps me sleep," she said. "Not sleeping, not here, not on the bus. But when I get home after riding, I can sleep. Something about the motion settles the mind, the way a mother rocks a child, not to entertain, not to distract, just to say with the body what words cannot say. You are held, you are moving, and the moving is safe." She paused. "My apartment is very still. The stillness keeps me awake. It is the wrong kind of still, the kind that listens back. But this," she gestured at the bus, the seats, the window, the city sliding past. "This is a different kind of quiet, a moving quiet, and my body trusts it." The driver understood. She understood because she had discovered the same thing from the other side of the steering wheel, that the bus, empty, engine off, at the end of the route, was the quietest place she knew. Not because it was silent, it was not. The engine ticked as it cooled. The city hummed outside. The radio crackled with dispatch calls. She was no longer required to answer. But the quiet was there, underneath the ticking and the humming and the crackling. The same way it was there, underneath the heating vent and the clock in the library. Not created, uncovered, revealed, by the departure of everything that had been covering it. The Buddhist tradition has a word for this quality. This uncovered quiet, this tranquility that exists, not because the noise has stopped, but because you have sunk below it. The word is Samatha. It is usually translated as calm or tranquility, but those English words suggest something you achieve, a state you reach through effort. Like climbing to the top of a hill, Samatha is more like what the Samanya Phala Sutta describes. Just as a lake, deep, clear and still, a person sitting on the bank can see the shells, the gravel, the fish moving about. The lake is not still because someone calmed it. The lake is still because stillness is its nature. The wind disturbs the surface. The rain makes ripples. Boats leave wakes. But beneath the surface, in the depth where the fish move and the shells rest on the bottom, the lake has always been still. You have a lake like this. Everyone does. It is the quiet beneath the worry. The place where the replaying cannot reach, where the carrying cannot weigh, where the fixing and the not knowing and the 2 in the morning restlessness cannot penetrate. It is not a place you travel to. It is a place you already are. The librarian found it in the amber light of an empty room. The bus driver found it in the blue glow of an empty bus. The old man found it in a chair by a window, borrowing a quiet that someone else had maintained. The woman on the bus found it in motion, the gentle, repetitive, purposeless motion of a bus going nowhere in particular. They all found the same thing. They found it in different places, at different hours, in different kinds of silence. But the thing itself was the same, and it is the same thing you are lying in right now. Listen. Not for anything, not for the next word, not for a sound outside, not for the answer to the question that has been keeping you awake. Just listen, the way you listen to snow falling. If you have ever been lucky enough to hear that, the almost sound that is not quite silence and not quite noise, but something in between. Something that tells you the world is doing something very quiet and very beautiful. And it does not need your participation. There is a quiet beneath your breathing right now. It is in the pause between the inhale and the exhale. That small, almost imperceptible moment when the breath has finished coming in and has not yet begun to go out. It is there. It lasts less than a second. But in that less than a second, nothing is happening. The body is not inhaling. It is not exhaling. The heart is between beats. The mind is between thoughts. And in that gap, that tiny, ordinary, unremarkable gap, there is the quiet. Not the quiet of the library, or the bus, or the porch, or the monastery. Your quiet. The one that has been there since your first breath, and will be there after your last thought. The one that worry cannot touch, because it exists in the space worry does not know about. The space between. You do not need to hold it. You do not need to protect it. You do not need to create it, or maintain it, or earn it. It is already here. It has always been here. Beneath the replaying, and the carrying, and the fixing, and the reaching, and the not knowing. Beneath every night you have spent awake. Beneath every conversation you have rehearsed at 3 in the morning. Beneath every worry you have turned over and over like a stone in your hand, hoping that this time you would find something different on the underside. The quiet was there, patient, unhurried, waiting for exactly this moment. The moment when the worry grows, tired enough to be quiet, and in the silence it leaves behind, You hear what was always underneath. And now, right now, in this breath, in this dark, in this moment that belongs to no one but you, you can hear it. The night is deep now. The stories are growing quieter. The voices are softening. And somewhere, in the space between the last word and the silence that follows it, the quiet is spreading. Not because you invited it, because it was always here, beneath everything, patient and still, and yours. We have one more journey to make together. It is the shortest one, and the most important. It does not begin with a stranger in a faraway place. It begins here, with you, with the body in this bed, with the breath in this chest, with the mind that has traveled so far tonight and is finally beginning to rest. When you are ready, and there is no hurry, there has never been any hurry, we will walk that last stretch together, and then I will leave you to the quiet. Not because I want to go, but because you no longer need the stories. You have found the silence they were pointing to all along. We are almost at the end of our journey now. The stories have grown quieter, the voices softer, the spaces between words wider, and you, wherever you are, in whatever bed, in whatever country, at whatever hour the clock has carried you to, you are still here. That is not a small thing. You chose to stay. You chose to listen. And whether you followed every word or drifted in and out like a boat on a gentle current, you are here. And that is enough. This last part is not a lesson. It is not a teaching. It is simply a walk to the door. And the door tonight opens onto sleep. So let us walk slowly. There is no hurry. There has never been any hurry. Let me tell you about one more person. She is not a stranger. She is you. Not literally. I do not know your name, your face, the particular shape of the room you are lying in right now. But I know this. You came here tonight because something in you would not rest. Something was circling. A thought, a fear, a conversation, a weight that did not belong to you, but that you have been carrying anyway. And you came here not because you believed a stranger's voice on the internet could fix it, but because you were tired. Tired enough to try anything. Tired enough to listen to stories about fishermen and seamstresses and beekeepers and librarians. Hoping that somewhere in the listening, the mind might finally grow quiet enough to let the body do what the body has been wanting to do all night. I want to tell you something. And I want you to hear it, not as advice, but as something closer to a confession. There are nights when I understand the worry, not as a concept, but as a companion. Sadness, the particular kind that does not announce itself, that does not arrive with a reason or a trigger, but simply settles over the evening, like a weather system moving in from the west. Not the dramatic kind, not the kind that makes you call someone or write in a journal or seek help, the quiet kind. The kind that sits beside you while you eat dinner and says nothing. The kind that makes the food taste slightly less than it should. The kind that is there when you wake at 3 in the morning and is still there when morning comes, patient and familiar. Like a coat you have been wearing so long you have forgotten it is not your skin. I mention this not because it is the point of tonight's journey, but because it is honest, and honesty, at this hour, is worth more than wisdom. There is a difference between being sad about something and simply being sad. The first has a shape, a cause, a narrative, a beginning, and perhaps an end. The second has no shape at all. It is more like a season than an event. It arrives without announcement, and stays without explanation, and leaves without saying goodbye. And while it is here, everything, food, music, sunlight, the faces of people you love, everything passes through a filter that dims it slightly, like looking at the world through a window that needs cleaning. You can still see everything. It is just a little less bright. If that is where you are tonight, not worried about a specific thing, but simply visited by this quiet dimming, then I want you to know that this too is a weather, and it passes. Not because you force it to, not because you name it or analyze it or find its root cause in some childhood event or recent disappointment. It passes because that is what weather does. The Buddha called the whole of human experience dukkha, a word often translated as suffering, but more accurately rendered as unsatisfactoriness, the subtle sense that something is not quite right. And the gentlest thing the Buddha ever said about dukkha was not how to end it. It was simply, I see it. It is real. You are not imagining it, and you are not alone in it. The stories we have shared tonight were not told from a place of having figured it out. They were told from a place of still figuring, and perhaps that is why they work. Not because they come from someone who has conquered worry, but because they come from someone who sits with it the way the old monk sat with the night watchman on the cold stone bench. Not as teacher and student, as two people awake in a world that is trying to rest. Now, let us do something very simple. Let us return to the body. Not the body as a concept, not the body as a thing to be scanned or exercised or diagnosed. The body as it is right now, the actual, physical, breathing body that is lying in a bed, holding a phone or resting beside one, covered by a blanket or not, warm or cool, tired or restless, yours. Start, if you are willing, and only if you are willing, with the feet. You do not need to move them. You do not need to do anything with them at all. Just notice them. They are at the end of the bed, or tucked under the blanket, or hanging off the edge in the way that feet sometimes do when the bed is not quite long enough, or the body is not quite centered. They have carried you all day through rooms and hallways and parking lots and stairs, through every errand, every task, every small journey from one place to another. And now they are still, not because you told them to be still, because there is nowhere left to go tonight. The feet know this before the mind does. The feet have already arrived. Move upward, slowly, at whatever pace feels natural. The ankles, the shins, the knees, which may ache or may not, which may have opinions about the day or may have already forgotten it. The thighs heavy against the mattress, surrendering their weight to gravity the way a stone surrenders to the riverbed. Not fighting, not holding, just resting in the place where rest is possible. The hips, the lower back, that faithful, overworked junction that holds the upper body and the lower body together and complains about it quietly, the way a bridge complains about traffic. Notice if there is tension there. You do not need to release it. You do not need to do anything about it. Just notice it the way you might notice a light left on in a room you are passing. Oh, that is on. That is all. The noticing by itself is enough. The body responds to attention the way a child responds to being seen, not with dramatic change, but with a softening, a settling, a quiet, oh, you noticed. The belly, the chest, the breath, which has been doing its work all night, without your supervision, rising and falling, in that ancient rhythm that began before your first thought and will continue after your last. The breath does not need your help. It does not need your attention. But when you give it attention, when you simply notice the rise of the chest, the pause at the top, the slow fall, the pause at the bottom, something happens. The breath deepens. Not because you told it to, because the breath, like the body, responds to being witnessed. It says, "Oh, you are here. Good. Then I can slow down." The shoulders. We have visited the shoulders many times tonight. In stories, in reflections, in the quiet invitations that run through this journey like a river through a valley. And perhaps, by now, they have dropped. Perhaps they dropped an hour ago and you did not notice. Perhaps they are still holding, still elevated, still braced. And that is fine too. The shoulders will release when they are ready. Not when you command them, not when you try, when they are ready. And readiness, like sleep, cannot be forced. It can only be allowed. The arms, the hands. Notice where they are. Perhaps beside you. Perhaps resting on your chest. Perhaps tucked under the pillow in the particular way that your body has found comfortable through years of sleeping in this position. The hands have been busy today. They have held things and typed things and opened doors and carried bags and touched the faces of people they love or gripped the steering wheel a little too tightly in traffic or reached for the phone one too many times. The hands are always the last to rest because the hands are the body's way of doing. And the mind that will not stop thinking is expressed in the body through hands that will not stop reaching. But right now, the hands have nothing to reach for. The phone is down. The day is done. The hands are simply hands, warm, still, open or closed, resting in whatever shape they have chosen. Let them rest. They have earned it. The neck, the jaw, that ancient keeper of tension, that silent record of every word you did not say and every emotion you did not express. If the jaw is tight, let it be tight. If it has softened, let it be soft. There is no correct state for the jaw at this hour. There is only the state it is in, and that state is honest. And honesty, as we said, is worth more than perfection. The face, the forehead, the space behind the eyes, where the day's images are stored, where the worry projects its films on the inner screen, where the mind does its most private work. Notice if there is tension there. A furrow, a tightness, the particular contraction that comes from thinking too hard for too long. And if there is, let it be. It will smooth when it is ready. The forehead, like the shoulders, like the jaw, like the breath, knows how to let go. It has been doing it every night of your life. It does not need instructions. It needs permission. You have given it permission tonight, not in words, not in any conscious decision, to relax, or let go, or practice mindfulness, or do anything at all. You have given it permission by being here, by listening, by allowing the stories to do what stories have always done. Carry the mind somewhere other than the worry, somewhere other than the replaying, somewhere other than the dark projections of 3 in the morning. The mind followed the stories, and while it was following, the body did what the body does. When the mind is not watching, it began to rest. Perhaps you are already drifting. Perhaps the words are reaching you from a greater distance now. Not gone, but fading, the way a voice fades when the listener is walking away. Not out of disinterest, but out of arrival. You are arriving at sleep, and sleep does not require the stories to end. It does not require the last word to be spoken. It simply arrives, the way dawn arrives. Not suddenly, not with announcement, but with a gradual lightening that you notice only after it has already happened. If you are still awake, fully awake, eyes open, mind still turning, that is fine. You have not failed. There is no failing at this. The night is long, and rest takes many forms. Lying still in the dark with a quiet mind is one form. Lying still in the dark with a busy mind is another. Both are rest. Both are enough. The body is resting, even when the mind is not. The muscles are softening even when the thoughts are circling. The heart is slowing, even when the worry is fast. You are resting, even now, even if it does not feel like it. The Buddha students once asked him what happens when someone who has practiced deeply finally lies down to sleep. The Buddha said something very simple. He said, "They lie down mindfully and they arise mindfully. That is all. Not they lie down peacefully. Not they lie down without worry. Just mindfully, aware, present. Knowing that they are lying down. Knowing that the body is in the bed. Knowing that the night is the night. And the breath is the breath. And the quiet is the quiet. Not adding to it. Not subtracting from it. Just knowing. You know. Right now, in this moment, you know the simplest and most important things. You know that you are lying down. You know that the night is around you. You know that the stories have carried you far through villages and monasteries and kitchens and libraries and apricot-colored rooms and cold mountain courtyards and porches where the jasmine bloomed and buses that drove through sleeping cities and a sewing room where a woman discovered that her body had been carrying what her mind refused to see. You have traveled far tonight, and now the traveling is done. Before I leave you to the quiet, I want to say one more thing. It is not a teaching, it is a thank you. Thank you for being here tonight. Thank you for trusting a voice in the dark. This voice, any voice, enough to stay and listen. If you found something useful in these stories, something that made the night a little easier, I would be grateful if you would share it with someone else who cannot sleep. A like, a subscribe, a comment, telling me where in the world you are listening from. These small things help this channel reach others who are lying awake right now, in rooms I will never see, carrying worries I will never know, hoping for the same thing you hoped for when you pressed play. A quieter night. And if tonight did not bring sleep, if the worry is still there, if the mind is still turning, if the body is still holding, that is all right. There is no failure here. The ferryman did not fail the river by not crossing it tonight. The librarian did not fail the library by leaving the light on. The seamstress did not fail the needle by putting it down. You did not fail sleep by not sleeping. You simply spent this time differently. Lying in the dark, listening to stories, letting the body do its quiet work, while the mind followed voices through villages and monasteries and gardens and porches and empty buses in sleeping cities. That is not wasted time. That is rest in a different language. Come back tomorrow. The stories will be here. The quiet will be here. I will be here. And we will try again, because that is what this is. Not a cure, not a solution, not a technique with steps and guarantees. It is simply a voice in the dark, saying, "You are not alone in this." The worry is real. The night is long. But you have survived every night you have ever lived through. And you will survive this one too. The night belongs to you now. The stories are yours. The quiet is yours. The breath, rising, falling, patient and unhurried, and older than any worry you have ever carried. The breath is yours. And tomorrow, when the morning comes, and it will come, it always comes, you will rise, perhaps rested, perhaps not, but you will rise. And the worry that kept you awake tonight will look different in the daylight. It always does. Not smaller, exactly, but more manageable, more human, more like something you can carry with 2 hands rather than something that carries you. Imagine for a moment a river at night, not the ferryman's river, a different one. A river you have never seen, in a place you have never been. The water is dark, not black, but the particular dark silver that water becomes when it reflects a sky with no moon. The current is steady, not fast, not slow, just steady. The way the breath is steady when you stop trying to control it. The banks are lined with trees whose branches reach over the water and touch each other, forming a canopy of leaves that the stars filter through in small, bright points. Nothing is happening on this river. No boats, no fishermen, no one watching. The river is simply flowing, carrying leaves and reflections, and the small invisible lives that happen beneath the surface flowing. The way rivers have flowed since before there were people to name them. You are like this river. The worry is the surface, the ripples, the reflections, the leaves caught in the current. But beneath the surface there is depth, and the depth is moving steadily, unhurried, in the direction it has always moved. Toward morning, toward rest, toward whatever comes next, which you do not need to know tonight. Outside, wherever you are, the world is doing what it does at this hour. If you are in a city, the traffic has thinned to its late-night hum. The occasional car, the distant siren, the rumble of a truck delivering something to a store that will open in the morning. If you are in a small town, the silence is almost complete. Just the wind, or the crickets, or the settling of the house around you, the small sounds of a structure at rest. If you are in the country, the darkness is deep and honest, the kind of dark that shows you stars, the kind that reminds you how old the night is, how many people have lain beneath it, how many worries have been held by it, and then, gently, dissolved by the morning that followed. A bird will sing soon. Not yet. It is too early for that, too deep into the night. But somewhere, in a tree outside someone's window, a bird is sleeping with its head tucked under its wing, and it does not know that in a few hours it will sing the first note of the morning. It is not planning to sing. It is not rehearsing. It is simply sleeping, trusting that the song will come when the light comes, because that is what has always happened every morning, since the first bird sang the first note in the first dawn. The earth is turning. It is turning right now, beneath your bed, beneath your building, beneath whatever ground you are resting on. It turns at 1,000 miles an hour, but you cannot feel it. The turning is so steady, so constant, so ancient, that it feels like stillness. And perhaps that is the deepest teaching of this night, that peace is not the absence of movement. It is movement so steady that it feels like rest. The earth does not stop turning to give you rest. It turns and turns and turns, and the turning itself is the rest. You are being carried. You have always been carried, and you do not need to help. Sleep now, or rest, or simply lie here in the dark and breathe. Whatever you do, it is enough. Whatever you are, it is enough. The night is deep, and the quiet is here, and the stories are finished. And you, dear listener, whoever you are, wherever you are held. The breath continues. The quiet deepens. The worry, that faithful, exhausting, well-meaning companion that has walked beside you all day. The worry is growing tired too. Even worry needs to rest. Even the mind that will not stop needs, eventually, to stop. And when it does, not because you forced it, not because you mastered some technique, but simply because the hour is late, and the body is heavy, and the stories have done their gentle work. When it does, sleep will come, the way rain comes, the way dawn comes, the way everything that is natural and necessary comes. Without effort, without permission, without your help. Good night. May you find the rest you came looking for. And may the morning, when it arrives, bring you gently back to the world. Thank you for joining us here at Moonlit Dharma. Until next time, rest well, sleep softly. And remember, you are not alone in the dark.